Neil Armstrong is remembered as the man who walked on the moon. But years before that, space nearly killed him in silence. On March 16, 1966, Gemini 8 was supposed to be a clean American triumph, the mission that proved the United States could do something essential for reaching the moon. Find another spacecraft in orbit, close in, and lock onto it perfectly. And for a brief moment, that is exactly what happened. Armstrong and David Scott completed the first docking in space, a breakthrough NASA desperately needed if America was ever going to turn the moon landing from a promise into reality. But almost immediately after that success, the spacecraft began to move in a way it should not have. First, a slow roll, then a stronger one, then a violent spin that kept building until the mission stopped feeling historic and started feeling fatal. There were no grand speeches in that capsule, no legend yet, no famous footprint waiting in the future. Just two men trapped inside a machine that was beginning to lose control high above the Earth. If Armstrong failed here, he would never become the calm hero history remembers. He would become a name attached to one of the worst early disasters of the space race. And the terrifying part is that the mission did everything right before one small failure tried to turn the whole thing into a coffin. Gemini 8 was not built to be symbolic. It was built to prove that America could actually operate in space with precision. That mattered because getting to the moon was never just about launching farther than the Soviets or planting a flag in the dust. It required control, real control. A spacecraft had to chase another object in orbit, match its speed, approach without drifting off or smashing into it, and dock successfully. Without that skill, the road to Apollo became far more dangerous, maybe impossible. Gemini VIII carried that burden. Neil Armstrong and David Scott launched, knowing this was one of the missions that had to work if the moon program was going to stay credible. Their target was an Agena vehicle already in orbit. The plan was demanding, but clean. Rendezvous, dock, continue the mission. Push deeper into the kind of orbital operations the United States would soon need for much bigger things. And then they actually did it. They found the Agena. They approached carefully. They locked on. The first docking in space was real. It was American. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough the country needed in the middle of a decade defined by pressure, competition, and the race to prove who truly owned the future beyond Earth. For a moment, Gemini VIII looked like one of those missions that quietly changes history by making the impossible look routine. Then the spacecraft started rolling. Not enough at first to announce disaster, just enough to plant doubt. Maybe the Agena was causing it. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe it was nothing. But space is ruthless about maybe. And some of the deadliest moments in aerospace history begin with a tiny movement that nobody wants to believe is the start of something worse. Armstrong understood that the normal attitude system was no longer going to save them, so he made the decision that separated survival from loss. He shut down the orbit attitude system and used the re-entry control system, the thrusters that were supposed to be preserved for bringing the spacecraft home. It was the right call, and it came at a brutal price. The moment he used that system to stop the tumble, the original mission was effectively finished. The extended objectives were dead, the EVA was dead, the flight plan they had launched with was dead, but the crew was still alive. And in that moment, that was the only metric that mattered. The spacecraft gradually came back under control. The spin slowed. The violence eased. The capsule stopped trying to kill the men inside it. Later analysis traced the cause to a stuck roll thruster, a tiny mechanical betrayal with consequences wildly larger than its size. That pattern repeats all through the history of spaceflight. Catastrophe does not always arrive as a giant explosion. Sometimes it arrives as one part that does not stop firing, one failure that happens at exactly the wrong time, one invisible defect that suddenly demands perfect human judgment. And that is why Gemini VIII matters so much beyond the headline of first docking. The mission proved something even more valuable than operational skill. It proved that when the machine broke at the worst possible moment, the astronaut in command did not. Armstrong did not panic. He did not hesitate too long. He spent the mission to save the crew, and that is one of the purest forms of competent spaceflight has ever revealed. Gemini 8 came down safely after less than 11 hours in orbit. A mission officially shortened, aborted, cut off before it could become what NASA intended. But that description misses the truth. This was not a forgettable failure. It was one of the most important near disasters of the space race. It proved docking could be done. It exposed how quickly survival in orbit could collapse. And it revealed, long before Apollo 11, exactly what kind of man Neil Armstrong really was under pressure. History likes to clean people up after they become famous. It turns them into symbols. It sands off the fear, the split-second decisions, the moments where they were one malfunction away from vanishing. Gemini 8 refuses to let that happen. It shows Armstrong before the legend was finished, before the moon gave him immortality, when all he had was training, discipline, and the ability to stay rational while the spacecraft around him spun toward disaster. In another version of this story, America celebrates the first docking in space and then mourns 2 dead astronauts before the day is over. In another version, Apollo inherits not a hard lesson, but a wound. Instead, Gemini 8 became something more useful to NASA and more revealing to history. It became proof that the road to the moon was built not just by triumphant moments, but by men who could stare down disaster and still make the correct move before it was too late. So when people think of Neil Armstrong as the man who looked calm enough to take humanity's most famous step, they should remember that his calm was not decorative. It was tested. It was earned. And one of the clearest moments it was forged happened inside Gemini 8, when the first docking in space nearly became the mission that killed him before the moon ever had the chance to make him immortal.